market with oil. They crashed prices from $50 down to $30 over the course of a weekend, and really sort of began the collapse that we're dealing with in the industry. Follow that up by the just shutdown of our economy globally, and we saw oil demand plummet because of it. And when you've got rising supply and decreasing demand, there's only one thing to happen, and that's prices to fall. And between the beginning of the year in April, we saw, almost an 80% decrease in the price of oil per barrel. I'm sure many of you know that around April 20th, we actually saw oil go to negative $37, the first time it traded below zero, the first time that it had ever gone negative. And just was really an indication of just how bad the situation was is for industry right now. And while there's a lot of talk about the price of oil in the market, it hasn't really been telling the entire story. Oftentimes what we're seeing is that prices are being sold locally, or barrels of oil are being sold locally much lower than what the market is reporting. In many cases in Louisiana over the years, if West Texas Intermediate was at 40, Louisiana crude might be selling at 45 or even $50. What we're seeing today is that it's actually trading at a lower level, and in some cases much lower. We talked about oil being at negative $37 at one point in time. It's traditionally been selling like actual real sales in Louisiana much lower than what the markets are indicating. And the reason is because we got too much oil. You can see here, this is a sort of a history of supply and demand balance for oil. And typically when we talk about OPEC and Russia, we're talking about them either adding oil to the market or taking oil away. And you can see that when we had really high prices in 2007, 2008, we were at a deficit. Then you go to 2014, 15, and 16, which we saw the latest crash that cost Acadiana, Home, and Shreveport over 20,000 jobs in our industry. You see that we had a surplus of oil that drove prices down. But also notice we're only talking about 2 million barrels per day. If you look at where we are in March, April, and May, and these are conservative numbers, we saw 10 million barrel per day surplus in March, 25 to 30 million barrels per day in April, and again projected the same. And again, these are all primarily because of the decrease in demand that we are seeing because of the global shutdown of the economy. Part of it was due originally in April. Some of it was due to the increase in supply, but they were adding maybe 1 million barrels per day on the market. Really what we're seeing here is that demand is just falling off the map because everybody is sitting at home instead of going on trips and going to work and getting on cruise ships. And so when you have the market that is this out of balance, there has to be an adjustment. And the first adjustment that we all looked to was whether or not we could get some big cut from OPEC and Russia in order to try to balance the markets. And if they weren't going to make some massive agreement to cut the price or cut their production, that brutal, unadulterated market forces were going to begin to take place. And so, as many of you probably know, Russia and OPEC came together, and in the beginning of May, they to go into effect at the beginning of May, agreed to a cut of about 10 million barrels per day of oil. It ended up being right at 9.7. They just recently announced another 1 million barrels per day. And that reduction is represented in red. And the markets responded by prices getting lower as a result of the announcement because it wasn't enough of a cut. And you can see in the month of May, with the cut that they put in place, because of how bad demand is, we still could have anywhere from 10 to 15 million barrels per day of surplus oil on the market. And so when you're producing this much extra oil, where does it go? Well, it goes into storage, and it goes into tanks, and it goes into pipelines, and it goes into ships. And then when those fill up, because we're producing so much more than we're consuming, eventually you run out of storage. And that's where we were dangerously close in the beginning of May. We're seeing some uptick in demand, but there is still in certain areas of the country and the globe, a tremendous amount of oil in storage and limited capacity. And so because of that, it's driving the price down even further because you can't buy a barrel of oil. We've had some of our producers tell us that they are not able to sell the oil they're producing because nobody's willing to buy it. It doesn't matter how low the price is because they just don't have a place to store it. And so because of that, all of this came to pass on the 20th of March or April, when at the end of the trading month, everybody that has oil contracts left that they've been trading, they have to actually take physical delivery. Well, the problem is that nobody wanted it and nobody could take physical delivery because there was no storage available, and there was a perception there wasn't going to be any storage available. And so because of that, we saw oil fall from $17 all the way down to $37 per barrel for greater than a 300% increase in one day, or a decrease in one day. And it was the first time that it traded negative. And we talk a lot about oil, but natural gas is doing a lot of the same challenges, in that we're seeing the prices there fall as well, from $2.77 in November all the way through $1.60 in March. And so, we're looking at it both from the oil side, where we're seeing historic low prices, and we're seeing historic low prices on natural gas as well, which neither of these individually would be very good for Louisiana and our communities in Acadiana. But certainly together, they both spell disaster. So to get an idea, we surveyed our members in two separate times to try to get an idea of what this all means for our membership. And, one, we wanted to know where does oil and gas need to be for everybody to be able to survive and just break even? Well, for oil, that needs to be $37, and for natural gas, that needs to be just over $2. We are a long ways today for those prices. And I want to say this morning, I think we looked at, we were at somewhere around $25 for oil and $1.80 for natural gas, or $1.70 for natural gas. So that is, it's a little bit of a challenge from a price standpoint. It's nowhere where we need to be to break even though now we joke we're excited about $25 oil. That's only because it was down at $17 that we get to be excited about 25. So what does this mean for industry? And obviously this survey was done, the initial survey was done prior to a lot of the federal government programs, but I think the results are still the same. And we did an updated survey and got more or less the same results. But we're expecting roughly a 60 to 70% reduction in our workforce around the time that PPP wears out, which will be around June 15th. Many of our companies have indicated about 23% of the workforce so far has been laid off, with another 27% coming or more within the next 60 to 90 days from where we are today. So while we've just started feeling the pain, once PPP runs out, if prices haven't recovered, it's going to be pretty dire from an economic standpoint. And then from on the production side, one thing that companies have to do when they're producing oil at these low prices, they have to make decisions to reduce costs and to, for better terms, hunker down for the winter. And so we've begun to see that companies are starting to shut their production in, either because they can't sell it or because the prices are so low. In our last survey, 4 out of 5 of our members indicated they have taken steps to start shutting their production in. They start shutting production in, obviously that's leads to a huge decrease in jobs, but also leads to a huge decrease in revenue for our state, for royalty owners, and for our local governments as well, because none of those dollars are matriculating through our economies in any way. When asked how we can help industry, what are the things that need to be done? Our members indicated 2 things as the most important thing that can be done right now, with the suspension of severance tax or a portion of severance tax, which we have legislation right now by Representative from Eunice, Representative Philip de Villiers, that has gone through the House Ways and Means Committee that's going to have to go back to appropriations for a short visit, hopefully a short visit. And it reduces the severance tax rate by 80% so that we can create some revenue to be able to help local governments weather the storm. And then the other one is to address our coastal lawsuits. And these are government-sponsored lawsuits where local governments, because they've been co-opted by a group of private plaintiff lawyers, have decided suddenly after 30 some odd years to enforce state coastal use permits. So these are local governments that are enforcing state permits. And so Representative or Senator Bob Henskins has a bill to remove the local government's interpretation that they should be able to enforce state permits. It's always been the assumption that locals can enforce local permits and state can enforce state permits. And Senate Bill 359 by Bob Henskins will clarifies and reaffirms that that is the position of the state. That bill is moved out of the Senate Natural Resource Committee and is on the Senate floor, likely potentially up for a vote on Thursday of this week. And just give you some more numbers when we talk about shutting in of wells. What is 4 out of 5 companies, if we shut in 4 out of 5 wells or companies shutting in wells, they indicated they might shut in 60% of the wells. We're about 17,000 almost producing wells in the state that could be shut in during these low prices. And what do the wages look like? What do the jobs look like? Well, this is direct employment in the oil and gas, just the extraction industry, not the manufacturing, petrochem, refining, just companies and service companies that are directly involved in the extraction and exploration and production of oil and gas, and the service companies that support them. We're one of the highest paying industries in the state, 34,000 jobs roughly at $3.2 billion in wages. When we look at those areas and we say, what is 60 to 70% of that workforce being laid off mean? Well, if you look at Acadiana, you're talking about 15,000 people likely to be laid off in the next 60 to 90 days, representing 1.3 billion in wage. 10,000 people being laid off of the 15,000, but right at $1 billion in lost wages. And unless something happens, that those numbers are going to come to play, over the next 60, 90 to 120 days. And this comes on the heels of Acadiana being hit really hard during 2014 through 2016. And I know that the region, I'm from Lafayette, that's my hometown. That's where my heart is. It always will be. I know there's been a lot of efforts to diversify the economy and to move into different areas, but the oil and gas industry is absolutely still today the heart, the soul of Acadiana. And when the industry is struggling and you're losing, 10,000 jobs and $1 billion in wages, before you even talk about the jobs that are lost because of that. Lauren Scott says that for every oil and gas job, there's roughly 3 jobs that are created. And so that loss of 10,000 jobs means that there's a potential loss of another 30,000 jobs on top of it as those dollars move through the community. And so now you're talking about 40,000 jobs in Acadiana. That's 20% of the workforce roughly potentially. So it is significant. It is dire. And we're doing everything we can here in Baton Rouge to try and find ways to provide relief, to keep wells flowing, to keep people working, so that if prices do rebound, that we are in a position to be able to take advantage of it. So with that, I know I'm trying to stay good on my time here, Amy, so that y'all will ever have me back, but I'm happy to answer as many questions as you would like.
Yeah, so we're still all learning Zoom. So if anyone has a question, you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and then I can let you go. I know there's not 0 questions. We have a very smart group of people. Not physically raise your hand. You got to use the raise your hand in the chat feature. Jackie.
You also have the chat feature. If you don't want to use your voice, you can just type it in.
Yeah, this is Jackie Lohr. I farm north of Crowley and involved in other businesses. It's kind of a catch-all, a trap a little bit when you talk about cutting severance taxes, because doesn't that lower the revenue to the state?
Wait, I put myself on mute. No, you're 100% right. In theory, if assuming that if you look at production and you're providing, and the way our bill does is if oil's below $30, it's an 80% reduction. So if you start with the assumption that we are going to continue producing without the incentive, then absolutely it's lost revenue for the state. When you're looking at a $37, I don't know, why am I sharing my screen? Oh, somebody else is. When you're looking at a $37 barrel break even, if we're staying at $28, we're not going to be producing any oil. We're going to shut in all of this production. And so in that instance, there shouldn't be any loss in revenue. In fact, by only reducing the severance tax rate by 80%, if it allows us to keep wells producing that would otherwise not be producing, it's actually a net positive to the state. Now, the Legislative Fiscal Office isn't going to go in that direction, but that's the reality of our members. And we recognize that the legislature is in a tough spot and that they are going to be looking for every dollar. They just announced that they've got $1 billion shortfall for this upcoming fiscal year. We believe that if the industry is allowed to continue working to keep wells flowing, that we're going to be able to keep people working. We're going to be able to keep royalty checks going out. And those are going to help communities make it through this process. If oil stays at 25 and we have to shut all our production in, that's just going to compound and add on to the challenges the state is facing.
Thank you. That's a good answer. And the first thing came to my mind when you said that was that it's good for the industry, but is it good for the state? I think that's a good answer. And whenever this comes out, hopefully that's always shared in the second paragraph so it's understood. Appreciate that. I can't say I feel your pain because I got to fill my truck with fuel, but we don't do very well down here if oil and gas is not doing well. So hopefully we'll dig out of this hole.
No, and listen, I know low gas prices in many ways are going to be good for the economy. There'll be a lot of people out there when we get back to work and get moving again that are going to be able to take advantage of these low prices, and it's going to help their families out. And so, we're not asking for $100 oil. If we could go back to 50 and gas would be at around $2, I think everybody wins in that scenario. But where we are today is just not workable for an industry that employs so many families.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? That's a good question, Jackie. I mean, do we foresee it? I mean, what's the timeline? I mean, so say people start moving in June, taking vacations, driving to Florida. Does that create some sense of relief?
No, listen, I mean, we've already seen some uptick in demand for fuel. The question is that how long does it take for us to get as close to normal as possible? And will we ever get back to normal? And, my wife's a travel agent. I'm not going to flash up her contact information or anything because I think that'd be poor form. But, we're talking, I'm seeing it through her eyes about how people are, what comfort levels they have in returning to their normal lives. And she specializes in Disney and all those. So, when people are going to be ready to go on a cruise ship again, right? Like how fast are we going to get back to taking our families and our parents on planes? That to me is an easy indicator of when the economy is in fully prepared to resume where it was prior to COVID. And I think the answer to that is not going to be nearly as fast as we all want it to be. I think everybody's going to be ready to go jump and go to a restaurant on Friday. I think if you try to go to a restaurant on Friday, you're going to have a 4-hour wait. But I don't think that the same thing is going to be true for a plane trip for that vacation that you've been looking for. I don't think that it would necessarily be true for concerts. And so when we say that if demand is down by 30 million barrels per day, it may get back to 20 million barrels per day down quickly. It may take a little longer to get down to 10, but closing that last 10 million barrels is going to take a long time. And, reality is that we could get to October and start flu season and COVID-19 season all over again and be right back to where we are. So I think it's going to take a little longer for our industry to recover because and really because of just the general concern for health and safety and returning to some of those pre-COVID activities.
I want to second your motion. I want to share with the group something I got over the weekend, and it says what you just said on solving the pandemic. This feels like a home construction project. It's going to cost more money and take longer than any estimates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, I've seen the V-shaped recovery things, and there's a lot of pent up enthusiasm, and everybody's ready to go. And look, that's true. I mean, like I said, the restaurants are going to be crazy. You know, people are ready to get their kids back in daycare. I think some of those things are going to be there, and they're going to happen quickly. I think you know, it's a some ways I even say this, but you know, like after 9/11, which was a regional thing, you know, it took a while for our country in our communities and our people to be ready to travel again. And you know, the fear of being in an airplane or on a cruise ship or in a crowd of 100,000 people in Tiger Stadium, you know, that's real today. And so for the energy industry who relies on global demand, right? We're not even talking about, do people in Lafayette, are they ready to go to Festival International? It's, are people in Spain ready to travel, in New York, and everybody get on the subway? I mean, there's so many pieces to it that go beyond anything that we've seen, that it's very hard to estimate when this will come back, but it certainly seems like it's going to take much longer to return to our lives as they were of January 2020, I think, than most people expect.
So uplifting, Gifford.
Sorry, I told y'all to get your bourbon.
No, I mean, I'm grounded.
Andy has a question.
Yeah, grounded in hope and reality. I mean, we are Cajuns. We're resilient. And again, like I always think about the workers, and it's something that we regionally are looking at, you know, from a workforce standpoint, is where do these people go? What do they do in the meantime? And trying to skill them up in something else or something different where they are valuable in the meantime, because it's real.
No, and look, and the challenge we'll have is if we do go through, and exactly what, you know, look, our industry is made up of people that aren't going to sit at home and take government checks. They are going to get out, and they are going to find a way to work. They're going to find a way to provide for their families. And so the question is when they do that, and industry is starting to rebound, and we need those workers, are they going to be there? Or will they have moved on and don't want to come back to the roller coaster? That's a real challenge that we're very cognizant of.
Yeah, because the work is definitely changing. I mean, I have a friend who just left this week for Guyana, which is in South America, who replaced the guy who's been on the rig for 70 days, but has to quarantine from 14 when he gets there so he can work his 14-day shift so that he can come back home. Just the nature of their work is going to be completely different. Just crazy. Sandy, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your presentation, and you may have covered this. Weren't we facing a glut of oil before coronavirus?
Well, so right in the beginning of March, right before Corona hit, although it seems like it's probably was starting to hit the demand side already, but we just hadn't recognized it. OPEC and Russia decided to put about 1.5 million barrels per day of oil onto the market. That sort of started to signal the downturn in prices, but they've since walked back on that. But it's really now this just crushing demand from the shutting down of our economies that are putting downward pressure on pricing.
And how much are we losing? What percentage are we losing to alternative energy forms?
Alternative energy makes up such a small percentage of the overall portfolio, and it depends on your definition of alternative energies. But you know, all of the wind and solar and other renewable forms of energy make up just a small portion of our overall energy makeup. It's not a concern for the future of the oil and gas industry. We're still consuming, you know, prior to COVID, the world was consuming 100 million barrels of oil per day. You know, the entire U.S. is 13. production, or was. And so oil demand is not going away anytime soon. Natural gas demand is not going away anytime soon. So we don't have to worry about that from the future of our industry, that we're going to be cannibalized by that. If anything, these low prices actually work to the detriment of renewables, because when oil is at $25 and natural gas is $1.50, I mean, that's effectively free energy for the world compared to what it costs to generate that much energy through a renewable form.
Thank you.
Hey, Lee, you got a question?
Yeah, I just, pardon my ignorance, but with all the economic development in the Lake Charles area and the LPG industry, I'm not sure how that relates. I'm sure it's a direct relationship to oil and gas, but I'm just curious about that in terms of the slowing down of the further construction and development that's been going on in Lake Charles.
Yeah, so no, look, Lake Charles and just Louisiana stories and manufacturing renaissance is driven largely because of low-cost natural gas. You know, the chemical industry tells me that because when natural gas got really high in 2008 and 7 and 6, they lost 50,000 jobs in the petrochemical industry, that we've gotten all of those back. And now we've got all these LNG facilities and we're exporting LNG all over the world. However, these low energy prices and the low price of oil to natural gas from a ratio standpoint has canceled some LNG projects and put others on hold. And so some of those big plants and projects that we've been talking about from an economic development standpoint aren't happening. And so, you know, they're not shutting down necessarily all of them altogether, but they're putting them on hold to see how the energy balance kind of pulls back together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was the Sasol project that scaled back from 21 to 23 billion to 11, I think is where they're currently at.
Yeah, and that was just one of them. And you've seen projects through Driftwood and Energy Transfer and others that have been put on hold.
Yeah. Awesome. Last minute questions, anyone? If you physically raise your hand, I can't actually see you. No? Okay. Thank you, Gifford, so much for your presentation today. It's really great. In fact, I had a couple ask for your slide deck. Katie said that we can send that over later today as soon as she gets it to us. So
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Be safe. See you in Baton Rouge soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you.